Get out! Her father's voice roared through the dimly lit living room, his face twisted in anger. His words echoed in Tina's mind, each syllable slicing through her heart like a blade. You're useless to me, he spat, his eyes dark with contempt. Tina's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the worn-out sofa. She had known her father's love was conditional, but even she wasn't prepared for this. Where am I supposed to go? I'm only 20. This is my home. Her voice cracked, desperation bleeding through. Her father's gaze hardened as he lifted a calloused hand and pointed toward the open gate. Beyond it stood a man, unfamiliar, tall, and ominous. His expression was unreadable, but the sight of him sent chills down Tina's spine. There's your payment, her father growled, refusing to meet her pleading eyes. Payment? Tina's voice wavered. Her knees buckled and she sank to the floor, trembling. Please, father, don't do this. Her tears welled up, her hands clasped in a desperate prayer. I'm your daughter. How can you sell me like this? But her father didn't flinch. His jaw clenched, his eyes filled with nothing but cold indifference. Tina's gaze darted to her stepmother, a woman who had never hidden her disdain. The corners of the woman's lips curled into a cruel smile, her arms crossed in satisfaction. I know you don't like me, Tina whispered, her voice barely above a breath. But you wouldn't let this happen to your own daughter. Please, help me. The stepmother's eyes gleamed with triumph. She stepped closer, tilting her head in mock sympathy. You're old enough to be on your own, Tina, she sneered, and I never claimed you as my own. The words hit harder than any blow. Tina's trembling fingers dug into the floor, searching for something, anything to anchor her. But there was nothing. Her father turned away without another word, his heavy steps echoing down the hall. The gate creaked open, the man stepping forward, his dark silhouette looming. Tina's heart pounded in her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, to fight, but her body refused to move. This was it. She was alone, and no one was coming to save her. Tina's hands trembled as she stood, her legs weak beneath her. The humiliation burned through her chest, but she swallowed it down, knowing there was no point in begging anymore. Her father's gaze remained fixed on the floor, refusing to meet her tearful eyes. The man by the gate stood motionless, waiting. His expression remained cold, but there was no trace of cruelty, only indifference. He was simply here to collect what was owed. Get your things, her father barked, and don't make a scene. Tina didn't respond. She turned, her vision blurred with tears, and stumbled toward the small room she had called her own. The cracked walls, the faded curtains, everything she once thought was permanent now felt like a distant memory. She tossed a few clothes into a worn bag, the weight of her father's betrayal making each movement feel heavier. Her fingers grazed the small photo on her nightstand. Her mother, smiling, holding her as a baby. It was the only piece of her past she had left. She clutched it tightly, holding back a sob. When she returned, the man was still there. He didn't move, didn't speak. Her father, however, barely spared her a glance. The shame that should have been his to bear seemed to roll off him with ease. Tina waited, hoping for one last flicker of regret, one sign that he might change his mind. But he only gestured impatiently to the gate. The man stepped forward and took her bag without a word. His grip was firm but not rough. Tina's heart pounded as she followed him, her feet dragging along the gravel path. The weight of her father's debt was now hers to carry. As they passed through the gate, she heard her stepmother's voice, low and satisfied. Good riddance. The words struck like a final blow, but Tina kept walking. She didn't dare look back. The man led her to a black car parked along the dusty road. His stoic face gave nothing away. The air was thick with unanswered questions, but Tina was too exhausted to ask. She could only wonder what awaited her now. A lifetime of mistakes had led her father to this moment, and now she was paying the price. But even as the car door shut behind her and the house disappeared from view, a small spark ignited within her chest. One day, she vowed, I will never be at the mercy of anyone again. The car ride was silent, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Tina kept her eyes on the road, her thoughts tangled in the weight of what had just happened. After what felt like an eternity, the man finally spoke. Delanne, he said simply, glancing at her from the corner of his eye. That's my name. His voice was calm, steady, and surprisingly gentle. Tina turned to look at him, searching his face for any sign of malice, but there was none. In place of the hardened expression she had expected, she saw kindness, a warmth that seemed misplaced given the circumstances. "I'm sorry," Delan continued, his hands gripping the steering wheel. "Your father borrowed money from me, more than he could ever pay back. He gave his word, and when that wasn't enough, he gave you." Tina clenched her fists, her heart pounding. "So what now? Am I some sort of servant? A prisoner?" Delan shook his head. "No, you're not a prisoner. I didn't want this, but your father left me no choice. All I ask is that you stay until we figure things out. I won't harm you. You have my word." Tina didn't respond. Words wouldn't change what had been done. They soon pulled into a quiet neighborhood. The streets were lined with small, weathered houses, the kind that told stories of both struggle and resilience. Delan's house was no different, modest, with chipping paint and an overgrown yard. "This is your new home," he said softly, stepping out of the car. Tina followed, the weight of his words sinking in. The small house, with its cracked windows and creaky door, was nothing like the home she had left behind, but for now it was all she had. Inside, the space was simple: a small couch, a table, and a worn rug. He led her to a tiny room with pale yellow walls and a single bed pressed against the corner. A small wooden dresser stood next to it, its top coated in dust. "It's not much," Delan admitted, "but it's yours." Tina ran her fingers along the edge of the bed, the mattress thin but clean. She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Thank you." "Get some rest," he said. "We'll talk more tomorrow." Tina waited until his footsteps faded down the hall. Only then did she allow the tears to fall. But even as the sobs racked her body, she made a silent promise. She would endure. She had no other choice. The next morning, the first rays of sunlight crept through the thin curtains, bathing the small room in a soft glow. Tina blinked awake, the weight of yesterday's events still lingering like a shadow. But instead of sinking into despair, she forced herself to her feet. There was no time for tears. She found a bucket and filled it with water from the outdoor tap. The cold bit at her hands, but she scrubbed the floors until they gleamed. The dust that had coated the dresser and shelves disappeared under her careful touch. She washed the few dishes in the sink and swept the small front porch. Then she turned to the kitchen. She found rice, dried fish, and a few vegetables in the pantry. With quick, practiced hands, she cleaned and seasoned the fish, the comforting scent of onions and thyme filling the air. It reminded her of the days she had cooked for her father, back when he still saw her as a daughter and not a burden. Tina barely noticed the presence behind her until a voice broke the silence. "Something smells good." She spun around, startled. Delan stood in the doorway, his arms crossed but his face softened with a faint smile. He leaned against the doorframe, watching her. "I didn't expect you to get up so early," he said, "and certainly not to do all this." Tina lowered her gaze, brushing her hands against her skirt. "I'm not used to doing nothing," she murmured. "It helps me think." Delan nodded, his eyes lingering on the tidy room. "Well, thank you. Breakfast smells better than anything I've had in a long time." A brief flicker of pride warmed Tina's chest. She nodded, silently plating the food. As they sat down at the small table, the awkward silence gave way to the rhythmic clinking of utensils. Delan's voice eventually broke through. "I meant what I said yesterday, Tina. You're not a prisoner here. I want you to feel safe." She studied him for a moment, trying to gauge the sincerity in his words. There was no demand in his voice, no hint of cruelty, just quiet honesty. "We'll see," she said softly, her guard still firmly in place. Later that night, as the crickets chirped and the dim light of the old bulb flickered, Delan stood in the small living room, holding a brown paper bag. He shifted awkwardly, as if uncertain. Tina had just finished washing the last of the dinner dishes when he cleared his throat. "Tina?" His voice was gentle, drawing her attention. She wiped her damp hands on her skirt and approached him cautiously. "This is for you." She blinked, puzzled, as he handed her the bag. It was small, slightly crumpled, but the thought behind it caught her off guard. "It's not much," he said, his tone apologetic. With hesitant fingers, Tina opened the bag. Her breath caught. Inside were neatly folded clothes, a soft cotton dress, a simple blouse, and a pair of comfortable shoes. Though not extravagant, they were brand new, untouched. The fabric was smooth beneath her fingertips, and the sight of them made her chest tighten. She looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. Why? Dylan's gaze softened. Because you're my wife now. I know this wasn't your choice, but I made a promise to your father, and regardless of how we got here, I will take care of you. Your wife? Tina repeated, the word tasting unfamiliar on her tongue. He nodded, his expression earnest. It's what your father wanted. I paid his debt, and in return, he gave me you. But I don't see you as something owed umver. I want to treat you with respect. I won't force anything on you. Tina's heart warmed, the bitterness from earlier that day easing just a little. For the first time, she looked at him. Really looked at him. His curly Indian hair fell slightly over his forehead, and his eyes, though tired, held a quiet kindness. There was strength in his jawline, but also gentleness in the way he stood before her. He was handsome, unexpectedly so. A small smile tugged at the corner of her lips. Thank you, Dylan, she said softly, sincerity lacing her words. He returned the smile, a hint of relief crossing his face. You're welcome. That night, the house was quiet. The only sound was the occasional creak of the wooden walls and the distant hum of passing cars. Tina lay on the small bed, the mattress firm beneath her. Despite the unfamiliar surroundings, there was a strange sense of peace. She pulled the thin blanket over herself, but sleep didn't come. The thoughts swirled in her mind. The events of the day, the unexpected kindness from Dylan, and the uncertainty of what tomorrow would bring. Through the cracks in the door, she could see him. He had chosen to sleep on the worn-out couch, his tall frame barely fitting. Though it looked uncomfortable, he didn't complain. You're my wife, and I will take care of you. His words echoed in her mind. She hadn't expected warmth from a man who had every reason to resent her. And yet, there it was, a tenderness that both frightened and comforted her. Tina sighed, turning her gaze to the ceiling. The shadows danced across the walls, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the weight on her chest felt a little lighter. Tomorrow would come, and whatever it brought, she would face it. But for now, she allowed herself to rest. The next morning, the warm sun bathed the small house in golden light. Tina had woken early, once again tidying the space and preparing a simple breakfast. The air was calm, and for a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the serenity. But soon a firm knock echoed from the front door. She glanced nervously at Dylan, who had just sat down to sip his tea. His brow furrowed, but when he opened the door, his expression quickly softened. An older man stood there, his clothes worn and faded, his hands rough and weathered. His smile, however, was bright, and his eyes twinkled with warmth. Good morning. Is my son here? The man asked, his voice raspy but full of life. Dylan grinned, stepping forward. Papa, you're here. The two embraced, the older man's laughter filling the small space. Papa, this is Tina, my wife, Dylan said, his voice carrying both pride and uncertainty. The man pulled back, his bushy brows raising in exaggerated surprise. When did you get married, foolish boy? He laughed, the sound hearty and genuine. And I wasn't invited? Shame on you. Dylan chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. When we have the official wedding, you'll be the first to get an invitation, I promise. The old man shook his head, still laughing. You better make sure of that. Then his gaze shifted to Tina, his eyes twinkling with mischief. Young woman, he said, sizing her up with playful scrutiny. Tina stood there, unsure of what to say, her heart pounding. You are very pretty. Maybe you should marry me instead of this fool. Tina's eyes widened in surprise, but before she could respond, Dylan let out a loud laugh, shaking his head in amusement. Papa, stop scaring her, he teased. The older man grinned, a teasing sparkle still in his eyes. I'm just saying, a beautiful girl like her, she deserves a man with some sense. Tina finally allowed a small smile to tug at her lips. There was something undeniably comforting about the old man's presence. Despite the hardships of the previous days, this light-hearted moment felt like a balm to her weary heart. It's nice to meet you, sir, she said softly, her voice steady. None of that sir business, he said, waving a hand dismissively. Just call me Papa like this fool does. Tina nodded, her smile growing. Okay, Papa. And with that, the small house seemed a little brighter, the air a little lighter. For the first time, laughter echoed through the walls, a sound that Tina had almost forgotten she could enjoy. Well, I'm not staying, Papa said, brushing the dust from his worn pants. He turned to Dylan, the corners of his eyes crinkling with amusement. Your mother would kill me if I stayed away too long. Dylan laughed, a low, hearty sound that Tina was beginning to grow fond of. You're probably right, Papa. Tell her I said hello. But just as the laughter faded, Papa's expression shifted, a look of quiet seriousness replacing his smile. He placed a firm hand on Dylan's shoulder. Sort this out soon, son, he said, his tone low but deliberate. Life moves quickly. Don't waste it. Dylan gave a slight nod, though he avoided his father's eyes. Tina could sense the weight behind the words, though she didn't press. Papa turned to her once more, the warmth returning to his gaze. It was nice meeting you, my dear. You seem like a good woman. Thank you, Papa, Tina replied softly, feeling an unexpected sense of belonging in the old man's words. With a final wave, Papa disappeared down the dusty path, his laughter still lingering in the air. The days passed, blending into weeks, and then into months. Slowly, the house transformed from a place of unfamiliarity to a home. Tina and Dylan settled into a rhythm. She tended to the house while he worked in the market, selling produce and repairing old furniture for extra income. But it wasn't just routine that grew between them. Conversations grew longer, laughter became more frequent, and stolen glances turned into moments of comfort. Dylan, once a stranger burdened by obligation, now felt like a partner, someone who listened when Tina spoke, someone who respected her thoughts. And Tina? She found herself smiling more, the shadows of her past loosening their grip. One morning, as the sun poured through the window, Dylan sat at the small table, sipping his tea. Tina joined him, the soft rustle of the curtains, the only sound between them. But this time, she had something on her mind. I want to get a job, she said suddenly, her voice steady. Dylan blinked, lowering his cup. A job? He echoed, clearly caught off guard. Yes, Tina nodded, determination flashing in her eyes. I've thought about it. I want to help. And maybe we could even start a small business. Dylan's eyes widened. A business? Why not? She continued, her confidence growing. We could expand what you're already doing at the market. You know so much about furniture. I could manage the books, deal with the customers, even help with the designs. And if we save enough, we could open a small shop one day. Dylan stared at her, a mixture of surprise and admiration flickering across his face. He had grown used to Tina's quiet resilience, but now he saw something more. A spark of ambition, a determination that stirred something within him. You really believe we could do that? He asked softly. I do, she answered firmly, but only if we work together. For a moment, Dylan said nothing. Then slowly, a grin spread across his face. You know, he said, his voice teasing, for someone who barely spoke to me when we first met, you certainly have a lot of ideas now. Tina laughed, the sound light and free. I guess I do. Well then, Dylan reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Let's make it happen. Days later, the sun was barely up when Dylan and Tina made their way to the bustling market. The air was thick with the smell of ripe fruits, spices, and freshly baked bread. Vendors called out to passing customers, their stalls overflowing with vibrant produce and handmade goods. Tina's heart pounded with a mix of nerves and excitement. She'd tied a simple scarf over her hair, determined to make a good impression. Dylan had given her a patient smile, reassuring her with his steady presence. Just be yourself, he'd said. The people here are kind. You'll learn quickly. And he was right. By midday, Tina had grown comfortable in her role. She greeted customers warmly, helped Dylan lift crates of fruits, and managed the coins exchanged with practiced ease. The work was tiring, but it gave her a sense of purpose, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. But just as she wiped the sweat from her brow, laughter, sharp and cruel, pierced the air. Well, look who we have here. Tina froze, her hands tightening around the edge of the wooden stall. She didn't need to turn to recognize the voice. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end. Her stepmother. Dressed in a faded dress that once tried to mimic elegance, the woman strutted through the market, her lips curled in disdain. Behind her, a small group of nosy onlookers quickly gathered, sensing the brewing tension. This girl, now a market vendor, her stepmother sneered, her voice loud enough to draw further attention. After all your high and mighty ways, this is what you deserve, exactly where you belong, in the dirt. Tina's face flushed, but she said nothing. She refused to give her stepmother the satisfaction of a reaction. But Delon, standing at her side, clenched his jaw. His dark eyes burned with fury. Enough. His voice rang out, firm and commanding. The stepmother's smirk faltered, but she quickly recovered, her gaze narrowing. Oh, and who are you to defend her? Another fool, just like her father. You think this girl will bring you anything but shame? Delon stepped forward, his presence towering over her. The crowd grew silent, their eyes locked on the unfolding scene. Useless woman, Delon spat, his voice low but deadly. Will you leave this place? His words struck like a whip. The stepmother's face twisted with shock. Go home to your gambler of a husband, he continued, his words dripping with disgust. And count your own failures before you dare point at others. A ripple of murmurs swept through the crowd. People whispered behind their hands, their eyes darting between Delon and the defeated woman. But Delon wasn't finished. His voice lowered, each word deliberate. If you open your mouth again, I'll make sure you never show your face in public again. Tina's stepmother's eyes flashed with hatred, but she knew better than to challenge him further. The weight of the crowd's judgment bore down on her. With one final glare, she hissed under her breath, "You'll regret this." But the words held no power. She turned sharply on her heel and stormed away, the once curious crowd now turning their attention back to their shopping, the tension dissipating. Tina exhaled, her hands trembling slightly. But before the fear could fully take hold, Delon's hand found hers, squeezing it gently. "She won't bother you again," he said firmly, his eyes searching hers for reassurance. Tina nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you." And as the day continued, the market moved on. But this time, Tina stood a little taller, knowing she wasn't alone. Delon was by her side, and no cruel words could change that. Weeks passed, and life settled into a steady rhythm for Delon and Tina. The days at the market grew easier, their bond strengthening with every shared laugh and glance. Delon's protective nature, once unfamiliar, had become a source of comfort for Tina. She admired how he treated everyone with kindness, even in the face of difficult customers. But one morning, just as the sun peeked through the windows, Delon surprised her. "We're not going to the market today," he said with a knowing smile. Tina frowned, confused. "Why? Is something wrong?" "No, not at all. There's somewhere else I'm taking you." He didn't offer any further explanation, only urging her to get ready. Curiosity gnawed at her, but she trusted him. Dressed in a simple but neat dress, she followed him to the car. The drive was long, winding through roads she'd never seen before. Soon, the bustling noise of the town gave way to wide open fields, then tall palm trees swaying gently in the breeze. And then it appeared. A grand mansion loomed before them, with towering columns, polished stone walls, and gleaming windows that reflected the morning sun. The high iron gates stood open, welcoming them. Manicured gardens surrounded the estate, vibrant with flowers in full bloom. It was the kind of place Tina had only seen in magazines, elegant, pristine, and undeniably luxurious. Her mouth parted slightly in shock. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Delon simply smiled, his eyes twinkling. "You'll see." They drove through the gates, the gravel crunching beneath the tires. As the car came to a stop, the grand double doors swung open. And there, stepping out with a grin as wide as the sky, was Papa. But this was not the man Tina had met at the small house. Gone were the worn-out clothes and dusty shoes. Instead, he stood dressed in a finely tailored suit, his shoes polished to a gleam. He looked dignified, his head held high, though the warmth in his eyes remained unchanged. "Welcome home, my daughter," Papa said, his voice filled with joy. Tina's breath caught, her gaze darting from him to Delon. "Home?" she echoed, her heart pounding. Delon nodded, stepping to her side. "This was always my family's home, Tina. I didn't want you to know right away. I wanted you to see me for who I am, not for what I have." Her eyes widened in realization. "But the small house? The market? Why?" Papa laughed heartily, stepping forward and taking Tina's hands in his. That house was where Delon wanted to start his life on his own terms. He didn't want to rely on his family's wealth. He wanted to earn his way, to understand the world, the people. And you, my dear, have become a part of that journey. Tina's eyes welled with tears. All this time, she thought she had fallen into a life of hardship. But what she'd truly found was something far more precious. Genuine love, resilience, and the strength of a man who had chosen to live with purpose. But why didn't you tell me? She whispered. Delan cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. Because I wanted to be sure you saw me, not just my name or what I own. And now I know. You did. Papa smiled proudly. And now, my daughter, this home is yours too. Welcome to the family. Tina's heart swelled as she looked at the magnificent house, but it wasn't the grandeur that moved her. It was the overwhelming sense of belonging. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just surviving, she was truly home. A month later, the grand hall was filled with soft music, and the scent of fresh flowers lingered in the air. Golden sunlight poured through the stained glass windows, casting colorful patterns across the marble floor. Every seat was occupied by smiling guests, eager to witness the union of Delan and Tina. Tina stood at the entrance, radiant in a flowing white gown. The delicate lace trailed behind her, and a shimmering veil framed her glowing face. But it wasn't the dress or the grandeur that made her beautiful. It was the quiet confidence she carried, the reflection of the love she had found. Delan waited at the altar, his eyes locked on her. His smile was full of pride and adoration, as though he couldn't believe his fortune. As Tina walked down the aisle, each step steady and sure, tears welled in both their eyes. And when she finally reached him, Delan took her hands, his touch gentle yet firm, a silent promise of forever. The vows were exchanged, their words filled with love, laughter, and gratitude. "You are my heart," Delan whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "And you are my home," Tina replied, her tears glistening like jewels. The room erupted in joyful applause as they sealed their vows with a kiss. Meanwhile, miles away, in a dimly lit house with cracked walls and faded curtains, Tina's father paced furiously. His hands shook, the creases on his face deepened by frustration. "That boy was a billionaire," he bellowed, his voice hoarse. "And I just gave him my daughter for a few thousands." He slammed his fist onto the table, the sound echoing through the small, musty room. His wife, Tina's stepmother, stood with her arms crossed, her expression twisted in disdain. "You should go and demand money from him," she sneered, her eyes flashing with greed. "After all, he owes you." Tina's father shook his head, his face contorted with regret. "This is your fault," he spat. "You pushed me to make that deal. And now look where she is, in a mansion, living the life we could have had." The woman scoffed. "Don't act like you didn't make your own choices. You were the one who gambled everything away. You were the one who treated her like nothing." But even as the words fell, there was no solace, only the bitter taste of loss. The passing years brought even more growth. With Dylan's unwavering support, Tina pursued her dreams. The memories of her painful past fueled her determination, and every late-night study session, every exam, and every long lecture pushed her closer to her goal. And finally, the day arrived. In a grand auditorium filled with applause and cheers, Tina stood tall in her black cap and gown. Her diploma read Juris Doctor, a testament to her resilience. As the dean called her name, Tina stepped forward, her heart swelling with pride. Delan and Papa cheered the loudest, their smiles beaming from the crowd. Delan held their young daughter on his lap, her tiny hands clapping with delight. After the ceremony, Delan wrapped his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You did it," he whispered, his voice full of admiration. "We did it," Tina replied, her eyes shimmering with tears. She had risen from the ashes of betrayal and abandonment. From a girl discarded like a burden to a woman standing in her own power. She was no longer a victim of her father's choices. She was Tina Master, a wife, a mother, a lawyer, and above all, a survivor.
Thank you all for your unwavering support. Please like and share the video. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. Thank you. Bye.